I'm afraid someone with your background simply doesn't represent the aesthetic standards our neighborhood requires, my neighbor Constance Blackwood announced at the HOA board meeting, her manicured finger pointing at my thrift store blazer like it was contaminated. I quietly gathered my papers, resigned from the board without argument, and walked out while she smiled triumphantly at the other members who'd let her speak for them. 6 months later, those same board members sat frozen as the HOA president announced they were selling our community center building to a private buyer. And Constance's face went from smug to stunned when I walked through the door with the deed in my hand. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was supposed to be a simple volunteer position. I'd moved into the neighborhood 3 years ago, buying a modest townhouse on the outer edge where the less desirable units backed up to the main road. It was what I could afford as a single mother working as a night shift warehouse supervisor, or so everyone believed. Constance Blackwood lived in one of the Grand Colonials on Magnolia Circle, the neighborhood's crown jewel. She treated the HOA like her personal kingdom, despite only being secretary. Her husband was a bank executive, her children went to private schools, and she had that specific brand of suburban viciousness that comes wrapped in pearl necklaces and sympathetic smiles. "Diana, sweetie," she'd said when I first joined the board, "it's so brave of you to volunteer despite your limitations. Single motherhood must be so challenging." I'd smiled and taken notes, letting her assume whatever she wanted about my limitations. For a year, I'd served quietly, suggesting practical improvements, better lighting in the playgrounds, a community garden, programs for elderly residents. Constance shot down every idea that didn't involve aesthetic upgrades or property value increases. "We need to maintain certain standards," she'd say. "Willowbrook Estates isn't just any neighborhood. We attract a specific caliber of resident." The breaking point came when I suggested converting an unused storage room in the community center into a free after-school homework space for kids whose parents worked late. "Absolutely not," Constance had declared. "We're not running a charity. Besides, children running around unsupervised would lower the tone of the entire building." "They wouldn't be unsupervised. I'd coordinate volunteers." "With what qualifications? Do you even have a college degree?" The room went silent. Board President Tom Hutchinson shifted uncomfortably. The other members, Dr. Patel, Mrs. Chen, and Robert Garcia, suddenly found their agendas fascinating. "I failed to see how my education is relevant to organizing volunteers," I said calmly. "It's about standards, Diana. The people representing Willowbrook Estates need to project a certain image. I've been meaning to address this, actually." She stood, as if giving a presentation. "Your house, for instance. That vegetable garden in your front yard? It's bringing down the entire street's curb appeal. My tomatoes are offensive? It's not about tomatoes. It's about aesthetics. We're not a farming community. And frankly, someone who thinks we are might not be the best fit for our board." "Constance," Dr. Patel ventured, "Diana's been an excellent board member." "Has she?" "Her suggestions are all about turning our exclusive neighborhood into some kind of commune. Next, she'll want food stamps accepted at the community pool snack bar." My face burned, but I kept my voice steady. "Are you suggesting I resign?" "I'm suggesting you consider whether someone with your background truly represents what Willowbrook Estates stands for." I looked around the table. Tom wouldn't meet my eyes. Mrs. Chen studied her nails. Only Robert Garcia looked uncomfortable, but not enough to speak up. "I see." I closed my notebook. Effective immediately, I resigned from the HOA board. "That's probably best," Constance said, already moving on. "Now, about the spring gala theme." I walked out, leaving behind a year of volunteered time and sincere efforts to improve our community. In the parking lot, I sat in my 10-year-old Honda, another eyesore, according to Constance, and made a phone call. "Marcus? It's Diana. I'm ready to move forward with that opportunity we discussed." What Constance Blackwood didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Diana Morrison, single mother and night shift supervisor, was also Diana Morrison, cryptocurrency early adopter and serial investor. The warehouse job was real, but it was more about staying grounded than paying bills. My portfolio, built from a $500 Bitcoin investment in 2013, had grown to 8 figures. I'd been approached months earlier about a commercial real estate opportunity. The Willowbrook Community Center, built in the 1960s, sat on prime land. The HOA had been hemorrhaging money maintaining it, and whispers suggested they'd soon be forced to sell. I'd initially dismissed the idea. I lived here, after all, and community spaces mattered. But Constance had just changed my perspective on what kind of community this was. For the next 6 months, I played a different game. Through a series of LLCs and investment partners, I positioned myself as the anonymous buyer interested in the community center. My lawyers reached out to the HOA board with an offer they couldn't refuse: double the assessed value, cash, quick closing. Meanwhile, I lived my normal life. Constance would wave smugly when she passed my townhouse, clearly pleased to have purged the riffraff from her board. I tended my offensive tomatoes, worked my night shifts, and attended every public HOA meeting as a regular resident. The board's financial desperation became increasingly obvious. The community center needed a new roof, the HVAC system was failing, and a lawsuit from a slip-and-fall accident had drained their reserves. Constance's solution was a special assessment, $5,000 per household. It's an investment in our property values, she insisted to a room of angry residents. $5,000 so you can keep throwing galas, shouted Mr. Peterson from Oak Street. The galas are community building events that cost $50 a ticket. The meeting devolved into chaos. Tom Hutchinson looked like he'd aged 10 years since I'd left the board. Finally, he called for order. There is another option, he said reluctantly. We've received an offer to purchase the community center. The room exploded again. It would solve our financial problems, Tom continued. The buyer would lease it back to us for community events at a reduced rate. Who's the buyer? Someone demanded. An investment group. They wished to remain anonymous until closing. I sat in the back, taking notes like any concerned resident. Constance was practically vibrating with indignation. We can't sell our community center. It's the heart of Willowbrook Estates. Then you find the money for repairs, Robert Garcia snapped, showing more spine than he had 6 months ago. Because we're out of options. The sale was approved by a narrow vote. Constance voted against it, of course, and made sure everyone knew she was the only one fighting for our community's soul. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. I arranged to arrive precisely at 4 p.m., after all the paperwork was signed and the wire transfer confirmed. Marcus, my investment partner, handled the technical details while I waited in my car, watching board members arrive at the community center for what they thought would be a simple transfer of ownership. At 3:58, I got the text, "Done. You now own the building." I walked in at exactly 4 o'clock, dressed in the same thrift store blazer I'd worn to my last board meeting. "Diana?" Dr. Patel noticed me first. "Are you here for the announcement?" "In a way." Tom Hutchinson stood at the podium, looking relieved. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that the sale has been completed. The new owner has asked to address the board." That's when I walked to the front of the room with the deed in my hand. The silence was absolute. Constance's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Tom dropped his gavel. Mrs. Chen audibly gasped. "Good afternoon," I said pleasantly. "As the new owner of this building, I wanted to discuss some changes to our lease arrangement." "This is a joke," Constance finally managed. "You're a warehouse worker. You can't afford." "Actually, I can afford quite a bit more than this building. But let's focus on the present." I opened my folder. First, the good news. The HOA's lease rate will be $1 per year. Confused murmurs rippled through the room. "However," I continued, "there are conditions. The community center will now offer free after-school programs for working parents. The storage room will be converted into a homework help center. The kitchen will host cooking classes using produce from a new community garden, which will be planted where the decorative fountain currently wastes water." "You can't," Constance started. "I can, actually. I own the building. You're welcome to find another venue for your galas, but this space will now serve the entire community, not just those who meet certain aesthetic standards." "This is vindictive," she shrieked. "This is business." I identified an undervalued asset being mismanaged by people who confused exclusivity with excellence. I invested accordingly. Tom found his voice. "Diana, surely we can discuss this reasonably." "We are discussing it reasonably. I'm offering you nearly free use of a building you couldn't afford to maintain. In exchange, it becomes a genuine community resource instead of Constance's personal event space." I turned to address the stunned crowd. "Every child in Willowbrook Estates will have access to homework help. Every resident can join the community garden. Every family can attend events without $50 tickets. Unless, of course, the board prefers to find another venue. We'll sue, Constance threatened. This is clearly retaliation for. For what? For you telling me I wasn't good enough to serve on the board? That's not illegal. Neither is buying available real estate. I smiled. Though if you'd like to publicly admit you discriminated against me based on socioeconomic assumptions, I'm sure my lawyers would find that interesting. Robert Garcia cleared his throat. Your terms seem very reasonable, Miss Morrison. I thought so. I motioned to accept the new lease terms, he said quickly. Second, added Dr. Patel. The vote was 4-1, with Constance the lone dissenter. She gathered her papers with shaking hands. This isn't over, she hissed as she passed me. Actually, it's just beginning. The transformation happened faster than anyone expected. Within a month, the homework center was packed with kids whose parents worked retail, healthcare, and yes, warehouse jobs. The community garden bloomed with vegetables tended by residents from every economic bracket. The kitchen hosted cooking classes taught by immigrant grandmothers who'd been invisible in Constance's Willowbrook estates. I kept my day job, though I adjusted my hours to volunteer at the homework center. The kids didn't care that I wore thrift store clothes or drove an old Honda. They cared that I helped them understand algebra and listen to their problems. Miss Diana, one child asked, is it true you own this whole building? The building owns itself, I told her. I just make sure it's used properly. Constance tried to rally opposition, but it's hard to argue against free programs and community improvements. Property values actually increased. Turns out, families pay premiums for neighborhoods with genuine amenities, not just aesthetic standards. She lasted 3 more months before listing her house. The neighborhood's character has been destroyed, she told anyone who'd listen. It's not exclusive anymore. Exactly, I thought, watching her moving truck pull away. The spring gala still happened, but with differences. Tickets were sliding scale, pay what you could afford. The decorating committee included residents from every part of Willowbrook Estates, resulting in a celebration that actually looked like our community instead of a country club fantasy. The vegetable garden provided centerpieces, and the kids from the homework center performed a song they'd written. I owe you an apology, Tom Hutchinson said, finding me by the punch bowl. We let Constance speak for us. We were cowards. You were comfortable, I corrected. It's easier to go along with exclusion than fight for inclusion. How did you do it? Really? You want the truth? I looked around at the transformed space, children running freely, parents from all economic backgrounds chatting, elderly residents teaching card games to teenagers. I got lucky with cryptocurrency and smart with investments. But money wasn't the weapon, it was just the tool. The real power was patience. You waited 6 months to strike back. I waited 6 months to strike forward. Revenge would have been buying the building and locking Constance out. Progress was buying it and opening it to everyone. He nodded slowly. Including her, if she'd stayed. Especially her. But people who build their identity on exclusion can't survive in inclusive spaces. She had to leave not because I forced her out, but because equality felt like oppression to her. Dr. Patel joined us, raising her cup of punch and a toast. To Diana Morrison, who showed us that common decency is worth more than aesthetic standards. To Willowbrook Estates, I countered, a community that's finally becoming one. The party lasted until midnight, unheard of in Constance's era, when events ended promptly at 9 p.m. to avoid the wrong element. Children fell asleep in parents' arms, teenagers helped clean up without being asked, and neighbors who'd lived here for years had their first real conversations. I stood on the balcony, looking out at my neighborhood. The townhouses on the outer edge no longer looked less desirable, they looked like homes. The grand colonials on Magnolia Circle no longer looked exclusive, they just looked expensive. And the community center, my multi-million-dollar impulse purchase, finally looked like what it was always meant to be, the heart of a real community. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, another property came up. Gated community in Arlington. Their HOA president sounds like Constance's twin. Interested? I smiled, typing back, send me the details. Because it turns out, changing the world doesn't require changing everyone's mind. Sometimes you just need to buy the building and change the locks on who gets to decide what belongs. And sometimes, the best response to being called too common is to make common ground so valuable that exclusive becomes extinct.